Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome CEO, Cambridge Leadership Associates, and author of Adaptive Leadership, Alexander Grashow.
Good afternoon. So, welcome to our community dialogue on integrating environmental and social into our core business. What we're going to do over the next period of time is hear from our presenters, and then in a new format for CGI, have a conversation for the group of us. And during the next part of it, you're invited to actively participate. What we'll do over this time is think about where is the state of this issue? What are the tools that are working? What is not working? Right? It would be easy, as we have in these sessions, to stand up and tell the wonderful things that your organization is doing, and we'd ask you to do a little more than that, to say, what are the challenges that you're up against? Where are we looking and have opportunities for partnership? Because as we think about this issue and what we have to do moving forward, there's a huge opportunity and need to adapt. And so what comes up is a set of questions. Questions about how much of our business model and products are we going to hold on to, and what are we going to drop and let go of? How are we going to do this work when we have significant competing pressures and commitments? And how do we work and operate and make choices, sometimes tough choices, in that space? And so the invitation is to tell stories, not the story you always tell, or just the advertisement, but what are you up against? Having done a number of these, I promise that you'll be remembered more for moving the conversation forward than just telling us what the best practice is that you did last week. And so the invitation is to think about, what is it that we're becoming? One of my favorite quotes is that we never become, we're always in a state of becoming. And so how can we do that becoming more strategically and do it together? My job over the next, once we start the conversation, is to try and pull that out. I'll try and synthesize some of the ideas. I'll try and pull out some of the choices that we have so that together we can understand where are we going from here. So in a minute I'll introduce our speakers. And I invite you to think about, as they're speaking, what's the world we're up against? And what are the opportunities that we have? What are the themes that you recognize between them? And what are the differences? As President Clinton said this morning, we're looking for the differences. We're looking for the choices and where investments can be made. And so I invite you, as they speak, to think about what are your own questions. I've actually asked them to refrain when we come back from the first few moments of Q&A so we can actually have a community dialogue, and then they'll participate with the rest of us. So with that, I'd like to introduce Eugene Ubalijoro. Was that close?
Perfect.
Okay, from Heineken. Please share with us your work. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Eugene Ubalijoro, and I'm a native of Rwanda. I was hired by Heineken 22 years ago in my native hometown of Kigali. I think I should start by saying that when I was a student at Georgetown University some many years ago, I was used to rewarding myself with a Heineken beer after having sweated through some very tough final exams. Today what I want to do is share with you some of our African experiences, the commitments that we've made with local sourcing in Africa, and how we intend to transfer those best practices in Haiti, a country where we just acquired a company, a brewery, a few months ago. Now, Heineken is really a global company, a proud global company with 140 breweries located in 41 countries. Now, if you drink a Star, for example, beer, or you drink a Primus in Rwanda, Dos Equis in Mexico, a Kaiser in Brazil, a Prestige in Haiti, or a Calic in the Bahamas, you are drinking a Heineken brand. Okay? This makes us the world's most international brewer. Now, we have 4 values that really distinguish us. There's 4 values which represent what we stand for as a corporate citizen. 1 is passion for quality in everything we do. 2 is enjoyment of, for life. 3 is respect for our people. And lastly, but not least, is respect for the planet. Now, brewing a better future. What is brewing a better future? Basically, brewing a better future is how we bring to life, our responsibility to society. This is a program which was created in 2010, in April 2010. And this program basically provides our company with a roadmap to becoming the world's greenest brewer. Basically, what we're trying to do with this program is commit or focus on three key imperatives. The first one being to improve the environmental impact of our brands and of our business. Secondly, to empower the people we work with and to really empower the societies where we operate. Thirdly, we want to impact positively the role of beer in society. Now, going to Africa, we've made a commitment to source 60% of our local materials in Africa by the year 2020. Now, why is this important? Local sourcing plays a key role in economically and socially impacting the communities and the thousands of farmers that we work with. Local sourcing also provides for a viable value chain and a reliable supply chain. In short, it really helps us to shorten our distribution channels because we're buying items like sorghum locally. This also helps us to reduce our carbon footprint, so we don't have to import. And we rely less on foreign currency. We don't have to use euros or dollars to import malts. And the most important thing about local sourcing in Africa, it really makes us relevant in the markets where we operate. It reinforces our license to operate. Now about Haiti. Haiti, I would say, is a personal passion of mine. The first time I went to Haiti was in October 2010. When I arrived in Port-au-Prince, I couldn't help but think of Rwanda. I was telling myself that if Rwanda had succeeded in rising from the ashes of the genocide, the 1994 genocide, why couldn't Haiti rebuild itself from the catastrophic earthquake of January 2010? In 1994, I was an employee working for Heineken in Rwanda. I was a lucky survivor, and I was able to contribute to the rebuilding of the brewery. We hired new personnel. We created new customers. We basically laid down the foundation for what is today a very successful company in Rwanda. And I said to myself, why not use my experience in Haiti and do the same thing? Knowing that there was a main difference from the situation I was in when I was in Rwanda, this time I had the power to do so. So I went to my internal colleagues at Heineken. It's not easy to go tell people that you want to buy a brewery in Haiti, a country which has been devastated by earthquake. I had to go to Amsterdam and convince the Heineken executive board. And after 12 months, the company agreed to raise our stake in the brewery from 20% to 95%. Now in Haiti, what are we going to do? We're going to source sorghum locally, and this is going to impact 18,000 farmers. This is a project which we're currently starting as we speak. And we are already working with local suppliers to buy 40% of our packaging materials locally in Haiti. Here we're talking about preforms for the package of our soft drinks. We're talking about caps for our bottles. And we're talking about plastic crates. Now, as key takeaways, what should you leave here with as a main idea in your mind? I guess what I'm trying to say here is, what we're trying to do is to create a link between business success and social progress. This new business model can be sustainable if we're able to, to find a way for society and business and our breweries to benefit from a shared value. And I think this is possible because I've experienced it personally in Rwanda. When I was a trainee 22 years ago, I did visit the plantations where sorghum was being grown. I was able to know the difference between red sorghum and white sorghum, The problem is we never talked about this. Such programs have been going on in Heineken for more than 25 years. And with this thought in mind, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I see I've gone over my time.
Okay.
I hope I was able to
Great. Thank you, Eugene.
interest you all. Thank you very much.
So, as we lead into the conversation, think about what was underneath what he said. Think about what it would take for this brewer to be the greenest brewer in the world. Think about the supply chains, everything that would be involved. And then also think about Eugene's own story of what it would take to convince them to open this in Haiti and the work he had to do on that value proposition. So next, Antony Jenkins from Barclays.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello? Hello? Okay, there's life out there. My name's Antony Jenkins. 25 days ago, I became the chief executive of the Barclays Group, a 320-year-old institution. Now, when you're 320 years old, you don't get to be that old without creating sustainability. So think about it. Barclays as an institution is older than the United States. So we've survived as an institution wars, economic turmoil, technology change, revolution in many of the countries where we've done business, and we've prevailed. And the reason why I think we've prevailed is because we've focused on sustainability in the short and the long term. For those of you who follow the press, we had another quite difficult chapter in our history through the course of the summer, which is one of the reasons why I'm standing in front of you today. And so what that says to me is that while we are adept at managing sustainability of Barclays, it's something that we need to get better at. Now, for any business, I believe that we are in business to serve all of our stakeholders. We're there to serve our customers and clients, of course. We're there to serve the interests of our shareholders. We're there to provide rewarding careers for our colleagues. But we also have to serve the broader interests of society, what I think of as being a force for good in the world. And of course, we have to do that in the short and the long term. Remember, I said Barclays was 320 years old. And that's quite difficult because it requires you to optimize between the short and the long term and to make constant trade-offs between the interests of different stakeholders. And if I think about why we might have had some of the problems that we've had in recent months, it's perhaps we became a bit too short-term. And under my tenure as CEO, one of the things I want to put back at the heart of Barclays is this notion of serving these stakeholders in the short and the long term. Like the last presentation, we believe that this activity is much more than just philanthropy. It's about using the capabilities of our organization to solve real problems in the world. And I'd like to refer back to a commitment we made at the Clinton Global Initiative back in 2009 to address a very real issue in the world, and that's access to the financial system for those often in the developing world who are right at the bottom of the economic strata. There's about 2.5 billion people in the world who have no access to banking services. Now, why is that important? Well, if you have access to banking services, it allows you to become more economically active. And then the communities where you live and work become more economically active, and societies become more economically active. And more economically active societies can provide better quality of life for their citizens, more stability, and so on. And in partnership with Plan and Care, we set out to address this issue. We committed to spend £10 million working in the space of something called village savings and loan associations. Now, I've seen this live in Uganda, and the way this works is that a small number of people, up to about 20, get together and they save small amounts of money every week. And when you've established your credibility as a saver, then you can become a borrower, and you can borrow small amounts of money to create business opportunities. And that model has worked well. It's a very, very basic model. It actually is literally people sitting in a circle every week, putting money into a tin box which has 3 padlocks on it, 3 different keys controlled by 3 different people. But one of the problems with that system, good though it is it's a victim of its own success, because the more successful the Village Savings and Loan Association becomes, the more money sits in the box and the bigger the security risk within the box. So what we then did was we added another element to this, where in countries where we have business, and that's in many parts of Africa, we were able to provide one bank account to the association so that all the money in the box would be deposited every week into the bank and kept safe. And in countries where we don't do business, but we're still running this program, we're arranging deals with other banks to provide exactly the same service. Now, what's the impact of this? I'm reminded of one of the members of these associations, a lady called Joy. Joy participated in the scheme for about a year and then borrowed $345 to buy some cows. With those cows, she was able to produce milk. She produced the milk at a profit. That then allowed her to borrow some more money to start 2 very simple hotels. And with the money generated from that, she was able to send 2 of her children to university. So you can see the line of economic sustainability for Joy as an individual, but of course for the village where she lived, for her family, and so on. And that has worked extremely well for us, and it's worked so well, in fact, that we are going to commit this year to continue that program for another 3 years, and we're going to spend another £10 million upon it. But why is it's a good program? Clearly, it addresses a key issue in the world, the need to create economic activity. But it also leverages our expertise as a bank and allows us to bring that expertise to bear on one of these problems and create a sustainable solution going forward. In terms of the lessons that we've learned in this process, it goes back to, firstly, really taking time to understand the problems that you're trying to address. Secondarily, it requires you to think about the capabilities that you have to bear on this problem with the problem itself. And thirdly, like we heard in the plenary session today, this is a lot about doing and less about talking. Because once you start to do, you start to learn. And once you learn, you can improve the service, make it better, and optimize it going forward. So this is something that we are very, very committed to at Barclays. It's one of a number of key initiatives that we're running around the world. But my principal focus in the next few months and years at Barclays is to serve all of our stakeholders, to harmonize their interests in the short and the long term, and particularly to become and be seen to be a force for good in society through our actions and through the types of things that I've been describing to you. This last slide is really just a summary of this. It's about, as I said, creating the social value that we talked about. The Banking on Change program is a very good example of that. And it's really about thinking about our role as a bank in the societies and economies where we do business, and trying to make sure that as a bank we are a force for good and we do create value outside of the products and services we provide, outside of the dividends we generate, outside of the employment we create within the world. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Antony. So again, as we look for themes, there's a number of themes. What is possible at scale? And what are we going to have to do differently to manage the short-term pressures and the long-term pressures? How can we find different logics and ways of working in that space? And also, as Antony talked about, the different stakeholders. How do we manage all those different stakeholders when sometimes those stakeholders are actually competing or have different outcomes that they're looking for? So just some themes to pick up. Next, we have Mindy Lubber from Ceres.
Great, thank you. Let's see if we could move this along. I'm going to talk a little bit in the broader perspective, not just about one company's actions, but about hundreds. I'll try not to bore you with hundreds, but give you some examples. Our premise is it is time to reset business strategies for the 21st century with sustainability at the center. And what does that mean? I've spent the last 30 years or so trying to integrate sustainability into capital markets. Make it clear that these aren't tree hugger issues, environmental issues, social good issues, only philanthropy issues, that capital markets cannot survive, cannot move forward, cannot have the successes we need, both opportunities and risk, unless we're looking at sustainability. Let's take a few examples. Climate change and water. Any of us who have read the newspapers for the last year, and we all did, and we all have, and we all do, there must be 2 articles a day about how climate is causing water shortages. Agricultural industries in the Midwest are suffering. Cotton crops in Texas are dying. Somehow we used to think that climate change and water shortages were just on the coasts. And if you had a big house on the coast of Florida, it impacted you, or a big company, otherwise let's not worry about it. Well, there is no place to run and hide. The financial implications, as well as the social and environmental, but anyone who chooses in 2012 to dismiss these issues as just social or just environmental, rather than not only the future of our planet and national security and public health, but the economic imperative. I know of no industry that will survive without enough water. McKinsey is telling us that we will have 40% less water than we need by 2030, a little bit less each year. Climate change cost just climactic-related storm damages in the year 2011 cost the property and casualty insurance sector $32 billion. Now, we could all multiply. We know how to say 32 billion times 10 times 20, but that wasn't a one-off deal. It wasn't just a shot in the dark. It was a trend that we've been seeing for 30 years. 2012 isn't quite as bad as 2011 in the insurance sector, but there's still the far more credit ratings dropped than any other year, and the cost will probably be about $20 billion. The issue is, how do we integrate sustainability into capital markets because we need to, as well as because it's right? How do we do it and do it smartly so we could have an impact? And what does it look like? What does all of this mean? So let's talk a little bit about resetting business strategy. None of this happens easy. When we work with the 85 multinational companies we work with, or the 101 large investors who are looking at sustainability as a matter of the financial impact, we look at the financial impacts of climate, of water, of the depletion of natural resources, and what it means. What does it mean right now in Shanghai? There's not enough water to run the hydroelectric plants, and they're shutting down malls literally these weekends. So we're seeing it every day in every part of the world, in every sector that we live in. The key is we've got to integrate sustainability not only as a risk and a cost, but as an opportunity and as a way to make money as well. This is not all about the bad news. It's not all about Jimmy Carter's stories that people keep throwing, that we've got to all suffer or be cold. There are opportunities to make money, and companies need to be integrating sustainability not as a one-off deal. A company who raises their hand and says, we've got the best recycling program in the world, or a superb philanthropy program, those are good things, and they ought to be applauded, but that's not leadership. What we're looking about is integration. We're looking about the kind of leadership it takes to integrate sustainability. With the Clinton Global Initiative last year, we said we are going to call on the Russell 1000, 1,000 of the largest companies to integrate sustainability in the way we defined it. And there are many ways to define it, but it is not one-off issues. It's not we're a good corporate citizen because we gave money. Giving money is good. But it is integrating sustainability into governance. It means there'll be board committees that are setting goals on sustainability. We know that the power is at the top. Let's make sure the integration is at the top. And compensation is tied to it. It used to be that compensation was only tied to shareholder value, or did you get produce more products? And in most places, that's still the case. But we are seeing in about 13% of the cases across the board, companies tying compensation at the top level, or at a company like Intel, all the way through down for every employee into what they do. Compensation is tied to their greenhouse gas emissions and their water usage and how they deal with natural resources. A few other things. Performance. We are looking for changes in performance from operations to products to transportation to facilities and all the way through the supply chain. There is no question that the power of companies now to address the issues of the depletion of natural resources. It is capital market leaders that are going to solve these problems. It's not political leaders necessarily. And I think we need to make sure that it's capital market leaders who are engaged the way GE is. General Electric, and for years I was a lawyer and a regulator, and I used to fight with Jack Welch, who was the CEO of General Electric, in some very difficult and tough cases. Now I sit on the advisory board for Jeff Immelt, where Eco-Imagination, their business line, their product line, is producing more revenue and seeing more growth by 10 times than any other part of the company. They're producing technology that's about aiding the environment. These are issues. We're seeing Walmart. Nobody ever claimed Walmart was a tree hugger. We're seeing them integrate into their supply chain, into their purchasing, into their transportation, into their refrigeration. Those are the kind of things we need to see. We need to not think about it as only a cost factor. We need to get over the fact that short-termism drives all, because you can't fix water shortages, climate change, sustainability in 3 months. It's not possible, but you can with leadership. It is time to reset business strategies with sustainability at the center. Sustainability must be a core part of business strategies, like Pepsi, who integrates it into strategic planning and R&D and everything they do, and dozens of other companies. It needs to be integrated into all systems. Prudential now has a board description. When they bring on new board members, they've got to have expertise in sustainability. It's got to be integrated from the boardroom to the supply chain. The reach of companies is through their supply chain and is a crucial part. We just worked with Levi Strauss to integrate a massive program with their supply chain on social standards. And addressing sustainability can deliver shareholder value. We work with $10 trillion worth of public pension funds and other asset owners. They are starting to review companies based on how they look at sustainability. Talk to employees. Employees care about working for companies that are leaders on sustainability. The recruitment of the best and brightest business schools are easier for those who are leading. The takeaway message is, this is not easy. We're not where we were 20 years ago, where people wanted to dismiss sustainability as a sideline, tree hugger issue. I think capital market leaders understand it is a core focus for our economy, but we're also not moving quickly enough. So the tension we need to struggle with is how to get over that, how to get past that, how to not live by quarterly earnings only, and how to make sure we are integrating sustainability into our largest companies, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the financially smart thing to do. Thank you very much.
So let's take up Mindy's challenge. Let's take up the challenge of what would it take to integrate sustainability into everything we do? What would it take to move the whole bell curve over? Because I know I go into lots of organizations and people say, we really care about sustainability. And then when I ask them, they do care about it, but they care about it after they care about securing their job or short-term results or their shareholder price or margin control, right? And so we have these competing pressures, right? And so let's think about as a group. Let's open this now to our conversation. What is it going to take? And again, not just these things should happen. I don't want you to raise your hand and these things should happen. What will it take for them to happen to move this bell curve over? Let's get a few responses and thoughts from the audience. Yes, over here. First comment over here. Please wait till the mic comes to you.
It takes education and awareness. When I read The Omnivore's Dilemma in 2006 and learned about sustainable agriculture, I actually went to my local university, joined the board of an environmental farming system, which has vectored into these conversations at the board level with technology companies, with financial companies about sustainability. And I do not believe I could have learned that kind of information without going to something that has the kind of history that agriculture has. It's not something you read in the most popular book. It's something you actually go and you look at on the ground. And the one message I would give to all of you guys about sustainability is that the number of stakeholders in the sustainability equation are 3 orders of magnitude larger than any other number of stakeholders you're used to dealing with. And you see that in the agricultural community, and I believe you will see that in the sustainability community. It's a very wide net that must be cast and dealt with.
Okay. And let's think about that. I mean, we can imagine, as Eugene talked about, changing the whole way that they brew to be the greenest possible. You can imagine that whole length. So what's it going to actually take to do something? Over a question here. A comment, please.
Hi. My name is Uli Frey. I work for Fundis in Latin America. That's exactly what we do. We assess large corporations on how to change their mindset and include these things, these social and environmental issues in their decision-taking, and then we implement.
Yeah, but my guess is they don't listen to everything you say, right? Yeah. So how do you get them to hear the full message or take up a larger percentage, if that's what you do? Help us understand that challenge.
It took us about 2 years to prove the pudding with the first project, which we did with a steel producer. And once we had that proof, then things started to roll by itself. But the big learning is that it's not anymore about choices. It's not anymore whether you invest 10 million pounds in this or that project. The new mindset is that it's the way that you do your core business. It's like 10 years ago when everybody had total quality management departments. You don't see them anymore. That's the way you do business nowadays. And we see this merger now between corporate social responsibility and core business. It's just the way that business should be done now, and not because we are better people. It's because it's a competitive advantage. Really is a competitive advantage.
Okay. Other comments? Yes. Derek. Mike's coming from behind you.
Derek Yoch, PepsiCo. I think what I've seen is the critical importance of courage and tenacity right throughout a company. And also a recognition, I think Mindy summarized all the challenges extremely well, but we don't really have a space to discuss what happens when some goals are in conflict, when some are easily achieved and the bottom line, the improvement to the bottom line can be seen quicker than others. An example is many of the environmental ones, you can say really yield eco-efficiencies. You can see the returns if you use less stuff, less water, less waste, whatever. The returns can be quite quick. But some of the bigger changes to the core portfolio of a company, in our case a food company, require much more complex changes in human behavior, consumer demand, and commodity prices and access. And often the streams of work often give greater value then to those that could be achieved in the relative short term, so that environmental ones may be playing out easier and quicker, often at the cost of some of the longer-term health goals. And that's where tenacity becomes so critical.
And what's helping you in that tenacity, right? What actually is helping trump an old logic to have a new way of making decisions? Because those are historic questions about short-term and those things. What's the new logic, or how is that working?
Well, I think, first of all, the market, the consumer demand, is rising much faster with regard to all of those issues that are on the positive side of sustainability. The investor community is starting to assess and look at us with greater interest and focus issues, whether it's the Dow Jones Sustainability Index or the broad investor community starting to judge us on those bases. And then, of course, the regulatory environment is starting to move behind this as well. And all of those forces are actually helping companies move along the path of sustainability.
Great, thank you, Dan. Coming over here, yes.
Hi, Dan Bross with Microsoft. I'm glad you mentioned the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. I would add FTSE for good. But what I was going to say is one of the things that could really change is if the analysts on a quarterly call ask our CFO and our CEO about sustainability issues. I do a lot of work with the socially responsible investment community, and they're very involved in these issues and very interested in the issues, but I still think
So what do you think it would take for that to happen, right? What do we have to get rid of the way we think about business, or what change would enable that? What's getting in the way? Because if we could shorten that time frame, help us think about that.
I think the way Wall Street analysts assess companies and analyze companies, they're just not looking at these issues. They're looking at, as Mindy was saying, the short-term quarterly earnings.
Great. So what would force them? Yes, come in here. Yeah.
Yeah, I hate to be the negative person in this room because I'm really inspired by all these comments. But it seems to me that when businesses run, and I've got a hospital supply manufacturing business, and we have all these sustainable initiatives, people, everyone in this room knows what you're doing and the good of it, but in the media, and I think in certainly in the States, maybe not globally, but in this country, it seems to be that there's the rhetoric and the talking points are quite the opposite, that, that cheap energy, that fossil fuels, that anything that's sustainable is job killing. And maybe this is more in the political spectrum than in the marketplace. But to me, it seems that we, the people who are in this room and really doing good things and believe that sustainability works and it's economically feasible and it creates jobs, need to be more vocal and more outspoken in communicating this beyond the walls of this room, because I think the general public thinks that those are just ideological, and it's not profitable, and it's not the way of the future.
So how else are we managing these competing pressures? Yes, come in here. We got one here first. We got to spread it around. Yes, thank you.
Well, not necessarily to the question of a comment, but I just want to vocalize that I'm a bit triggered by this conversation.
Sure.
And it is the best definition I've heard of sustainability is to live in a way that all all others can live. And I don't know if we've agreed to that definition. I don't know if we've agreed to a definition that everyone has the right to exist. And I'm representing the CGIU students here, and we often go back on that question, and we say we didn't really cause this problem, and yet we have to deal with it, and we use it as a token of all right, this is our call for of our generation. But the reality of it is, why did we lose in Copenhagen, or why is nothing going to replace Kyoto? And I'm really struggling with the fact that, is it in November when we make a very, very intentional decision as Americans, will that guide our thoughts? That everyone has the right to exist. And I don't know if businesses agree to that.
And what would it take to get agreement, right? Agreement both on that idea and agreement of which of the competing pressures that we're starting to lay out are more important than others. Yes, we had a comment here.
Thanks. I'm Paula DePerno with the Carbon Disclosure Project. Like Mindy, I've been listening to this stuff for 30 years, and Mindy's certainly vocalized. I think what needs to change is a marriage between what the fellow from Microsoft said and everybody in this room who makes money, has money, influences the use of money, invests money, change the way they define timelines. We need more patient capital, and that would reconcile a lot of the contradictions. Plus, several examples at scale. And I would say, you have two people sitting there, I would wonder, say, for example, if Barclays would make a decision to invest in the Heineken plant to help them use rainwater, because there's no drinkable water in Haiti, and it's never going to be possible to actually be a very green brewery, I wouldn't think, given the water shortage. However, rainwater is something very viable. No one is willing to invest in that at a scale level in Haiti today. And so maybe if you made that demo and the return of the rate of return was realistic relative to the rainfall pattern, you'd have a new demonstration of what patient capital could be.
Comment here, yes.
Dennis Feldy with Keystone Human Services. Been a member of CGI since 2007, and one of the most exciting and promising trends that I've seen is this every year a greater degree of integration of the social initiatives and the sustainability issues, particularly among the major corporations, and particularly the CEOs of so many of those corporations being on the stage and being more passionate about these issues than just about anyone. And I'm beginning to think, in observing this, that people are beginning to look forward maybe to a world maybe where the population level is off at 10 billion and concluding maybe it's sustainable at that level. Maybe there is enough food, enough water, enough energy, and the deep understanding that a more peaceful, prosperous, healthy, educated world really is very good for business. And out there in that future, you as a market of 10 billion people, if people can figure out how to do this. And it seems to me that the major corporations and business might actually have a more powerful role in this process than even our governments. And that's I think is a very extraordinary thought to see the extraordinary capacity that is there as a result of the infrastructure and capital and resources that our major corporations are acquiring.
So we certainly see progress. The question is it happening quick enough, right? And I take the comment before seriously that what would it take for each of us to do more for this issue? And what's the rate of change that we need to see? Yes, comment here, and then we'll come to you in a second.
Catherine Cunningham, Ecosphere Productions, and to your point on integrated sustainability, I think what it takes is game-changing role models and game-changing examples. And I have two to share that I think were just fabulous and really turned my mind. So if anyone saw the Bloomberg article, I think it was Paul Pullman, Captain Planet, and how he actually did away with those quarterly reports. He said that allowed his executive team to think of long-term, profits and essentially put the mindset of their whole board into that, long-term thinking. And the second was I was just fortunate to be part of an event 2 nights ago at the Ceres Foundation, the Open Society, where they were celebrating the completion of their third round financing for Clean Star Mozambique, which was a phenomenal turnkey project. And the players is very interesting. They had, the first, philanthropic sort of investors, but then the later stage, Novozymes and then Soros Foundation. And, their response was, we looked at this and we had to do the numbers again and see, my God, this is $1 billion business. The business was essentially responding to the charcoal and deforestation. So they solved in this one turnkey project, avoided deforestation, soil enhancement, entrepreneurship and opportunities for women at the ground level. And they saw that this was a really viable business. And I thought, wow, it was the first time I felt, and I've been in this group a while as well, this is actually a real turnkey moment. I see this as a viable business opportunity just like all the others. It was very exciting. So
let's go back to the first example, though. I want to come back. You'll have a comment. But that's on the first thing you were saying, right? This idea of quarterly earnings and not reporting quarterly earnings. Many people in this room are responsible for quarterly earnings. Right? What would the pressures and deliverables that you have to do to keep those quarterly earnings are enormous. So what would it actually take to give it up? What would the world have to look like? How would business have to change? Because many people think it's a good idea. Then you walk into the way business is run, and it's not even feasible to think about. So how do we narrow that gap? You want to comment on that, or I know I called you before.
Yeah, well,
please.
The issue was exactly what's in the middle, the return on investment on the short. Sorry, Francesco Piazzesi from Housing for All in Mexico. The return on investment, it's what's in the middle, the short-term return on investment. But also, sustainability and impact investment has to be financially educated. Yeah. And now the bar is so high that no one can jump it. So let it bring it down. And if you can jump it, then you can go to the next step.
Sure.
See Banca Compartamos. They started with a grant, and now they sell it to $400 million. That's the best example. Not in the short term, in the long term.
Right. You all have short-term pressures, right? You have to deliver results in short term. So what would it take to relieve some of those short-term pressures so we actually could think a little bit longer? Because we can imagine the pressure on each of you and the organizations you work with to have and report routinely, methodically. So as we think about that pressure, what would it take to change those pressures? I don't know if any of you, you're mic'd up, so if you don't mind standing up.
Yes, I actually like the comment from the gentleman over there about the fact that sustainability is no longer a choice, okay? This has to be part of our ways of working if we're going to survive for the longer term. Take water, for example. In Heineken's case, water is the most important ingredient, okay? So we have to monitor the way we manage water in a very scientific way. In 2008, for example, we're spending more than 5 liters per 1 liter of beer, okay? Today, we're using 4.5 liters for 1 liter of beer. By 2020, we want to be able to go to around 3.7 liters for 1 liter of beer. And for this to happen, we need to have a communication program, we need to have a short-term incentive program, and this has to be rolled out across all the 140 breweries that I was talking about. So water, for us, is as critical as anything that you can think of.
And you have to probably report on your water usage how often?
Every month. Every month, I sit down on the phone with a general manager and their technical team. We go through a performance report on water, on energy. Why is your water metrics so high? What happened?
Right.
What are you doing to address that? So this is part of the monthly conversation with the GM, general manager. I have supply chain targets. I have water targets in my own bonus programs. So this is real in Heineken.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yeah, Mindy.
So I do think we need to be thinking about systems changes. There's no doubt that at companies with leaders who understand this, they're starting to change things. At Microsoft, they literally now have a budget for every human being at the company on how much carbon they could use. And if they go over it, well, I guess they can't travel. Very smart. Metrics-driven, person by person. So there are companies moving things where they're integrating sustainability into all that they do. But until there are a few things we have to think about to have across-the-board changes. So it's not just the leadership companies, it's everybody. First of all, I believe that capital markets will have more of an impact than politics, but we do need policies that have a level playing field, whether it's putting a price on carbon or how we manage water, and that is not unimportant. I think we need corporate leaders making the case for those policies. This is not just for the environmental groups. We need to have the right market signals. Capital markets are smart if they get the right, clear, honest signals. Right now, the signal we're giving is carbon pollution costs us zero, even though it costs us maybe our entire future. But we don't price it here in the United States, so when something's free, you get more of it. So one thing to think about is the right signals and leveling the playing field so everybody's playing by the same rules. The second thing we need to think about, capital markets are ruled by compensation. Good, bad, let's not put values on it. It is the way it is, and it's fine. But if we compensate everybody based on short-termism, they're going to produce for short-termism. That's just the way it is. So money market managers are compensated at the most on a yearly basis, some on a 6-month basis, and some on a quarterly basis. We need to start changing the way they're compensated. If they're compensated to look at things over a longer time frame, they're happy to do that. The same thing with companies. If CEOs are compensated for shareholder value or the number of products produced or whatever the criteria are, rather than for a 3-year look at something or for what they've accomplished on the sustainability front, I think they'll produce more. So what are the new norms, the new policies, the new practices that could be applied across the board?
Coming over here.
Could I?
Oh, yeah, do you want to speak to that first? Or?
Do you mind if I?
Yeah, let me just get speaking, then we'll come back. Yeah, please.
So, I think it's possible to get extremely depressed about the state of the world when you come to fora like this. Because pretty much all of our problems are extremely long-tail problems. All the problems we've talked about, water, energy, agriculture, they're all very long-tail problems. And most of the institutions of the world are geared to short-termism. We can criticize quarterly earnings, but there's nothing more short-term than a politician up for re-election, right? So, and we just have to recognize that if we're going to shift from short to balanced, and I think I'd use balanced as opposed to long-term, short to balanced, this is really about leadership. And what you see now in some of the companies that were quoted previously is, you're seeing a normal distribution, and this is the first start of the tail of that distribution. And we have to wait for the big bulge in the middle to come through. But the thing that gives me grounds for optimism on this, as somebody who's been involved in big businesses all my career, is that actually to run a business that's going to deliver in a balanced way, short and long term across stakeholders, is inherently more complex than running a business for short term profit delivery. Now, it never feels like that when you're running a company for short term profit delivery, but it is. And therefore, and this was somewhat what the CEO of Walmart was saying earlier on, therefore, if you are going to run a business in that way, you have to build a business that has more capability. And to build that capability, the institution has to learn how to get better at doing this stuff. And as it learns, it reinforces the capability. So actually, the essence of competitive advantage in the corporate world over the next 2 decades comes from being able to master this notion of balance. And that's why I think you can come at this from a kind of ethical, moral point of view, and I think that's important, and I believe in that. But I also come at this from a very pragmatic point of view. And that's why I think you see business leaders interested in this. They're interested in it from both points of view. So as institutions wake up to this underlying capability issue, I think you'll see an acceleration towards it. But at the end of the day, it requires leaders in big companies to do this. You can't kind of mandate this. You can't legislate this. People have to come to this through their own experience. And the more you see companies, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Heineken, whether it's Unilever, companies like that, taking stands like this, making progress and getting rewarded for it, then the movement will gain its own momentum and accelerate.
Yeah, thank you. And part of that's going to require a level of sophistication and creativity that we haven't always had the time to afford, right? And so what's also going to free up that creative model of how we're going to think differently and behave differently?
Okay, actually, this was a very nice setup. Thank you for that. Beth Heider. I'm an SVP of Green Markets for Skanska. We're an international construction company. Thank you. I think that the leadership also requires a certain amount of corporate bravery. Corporate bravery. And so just as a small example, really small example, our offices here in New York City in the Empire State Building, when we moved in, there was an internal discussion whether we should build out to LEED Gold or LEED Platinum. I am also, by the way, the chair of the U.S. Green Building Council, so LEED is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's a metric that the USGBC has created to measure performance. And there was a lot of discussion about what the cost would be, not the life cycle value, but what the initial cost would be. So a few determined souls within our group tapped the corporate bravery on the part of our leadership to say, we need to change this argument. The additional cost that's necessary to get to LEED Platinum should cost no more. That was the original thing. It should cost no more. We said, okay, no more over the life of the lease. And so over the life of our 15-year lease, we're now on target to return in 5 years, which means $500,000 in energy savings to our bottom line. Yeah. That actually has created a great deal of excitement across the company that there seems to be this connection between not cost but life cycle value.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful example where you can have clear life cycle value. And it's another challenge of bravery where you can't always prove that equation, or something has to happen and you still have to prove that equation. And tenacity and bravery are important, but they're not always clearly rewarded. And so how do we work on that challenge seems to be interesting to add to. Let's get a comment here.
Well, I'll bring a comment from the environmental side. My name is Paul Gallet. I run Hudson Riverkeeper here in New York. You said at the beginning you wanted to hear more about the failures than about the successes. I think we need a little more courage to admit just the scope of the problem and how difficult it is. Now, I will tell a success story because it shows that we understand in the environmental field we need some bravery too. Mm-hmm. There's a proposal to bring a power line down the Hudson River, which caused us a great deal of concern from the start. We got funding to do the science. We got some mitigation out of the project. We found that the mitigation would probably lead to a safer, cleaner, more robust Hudson than if the project was not done. We signed on to it. But let's be honest with ourselves about the scope of the problem.
Okay. Yes, you're next to you, Bruce, holding for a while.
Okay, Jane Madgwick from Wetlands International. I'm very encouraged by a lot of what I've heard from the business community about improving sustainability performance in their business. But what's bothering me a bit about the conversation is that you can't really measure environmental and social sustainability at the company level. You can only really measure it in, say, the river basin level or a national level and so on. So one of the challenges, I think, facing these leader businesses is actually being a stakeholder. For example, in a river basin, overuse of water. And in other forums, there's talk about the water, food, energy nexus. And this is really the heart of it, because it's not about just being very efficient in water use or meeting a consumption target. It's actually about how much impact is that water use having. Even if it's very efficient and a much lower level than has ever been achieved before, it may still be too much in terms of the impact on other stakeholders or other uses. So this requires a whole new way of thinking and working, and a willingness to get into multi-stakeholder dialogues, and perhaps in countries where there isn't good governance and regulation in place to enable such dialogue to happen, will the business community actually invest in helping put those systems in place to make sure that it's actually about impact and not just about their own performance against their own metrics?
So let's take up this challenge of metrics, right? Because the first bottom line metrics are much easier to manage, right? And if we have to do important work, only some of which we can measure, what are we going to do in this next period where it's important to do but we can't fully measure? I know there are more measurements than we've ever had before. There's a comment in the back first, and then I'll need to come to some other sections too.
Thank you. Pierre Ferrari with Heifer International, and I'm on the board of Ben & Jerry's, which has been in this game for decades. A couple of things. One is we define sustainability as linked prosperity. This idea, and I resonate to what the CGI University gentleman talked about, this idea that are we recognizing the dignity of all life in everything that's been done? So we do that in our value chain. The approach, and one more comment, we have a lot of research on our consumers and the enjoyment they have with our ice cream. But in spite of the fact that we've been doing sustainability work for decades, only about 10 to 15% of our consumers actually recognize the sustainability work. And we've been doing this for a long time. 85% buy because they love the ice cream, Cherry Garcia being my favorite. But the The fundamentals, though, and the way we're approaching the problem now is that we want to be totally transparent about everything we do. So to use a few examples of the people around here, is Pepsi-Cola actually declaring how their workers in the sugar fields are actually being treated? You know, to what level do they have dignity in their lives? And you can use examples everywhere about that. In fact, I think you could argue that generally the metrics of the value chain, the dignity link, if you like, is actually very poor. Extremely poor. So, you know, we talk about sustainability, but none of us are really doing it.
So what's it, over here, what's it taking to do it, right? Because we're talking about what would it take to take up that work?
Well, coming from the environmental side, I'm the director of the Cheetah Conservation Fund, and I think a species survival could be a metric, especially in very endangered species in very large landscapes. And you can link in the sustainability to the people, to the livelihoods, and to a species. And our businesses around the world are linked in, especially to many of the areas where the cheetahs and other endangered species are actually living. And we'd appreciate that kind of business initiative. It's a metric that you can count. We know that we're losing species at a rate that is just unbelievable. And that really affects our young people, it affects our children, and it really affects our ecosystems.
Sure. Comment in the middle here.
Hello, I'm Olivier from Man and Nature. I worked 10 years in Africa developing conservation programs, and I've been able to bring into these countries a CEO of companies like the famous Chanel, like many different other companies. And having these CEOs to be on the field, they got concerned about what was going on, and they started to be involved. Financing, development, financing conservation. And now what they see is that their staff is getting involved. And this is a very good point, to motivate companies. Because staff, when they're proud of their company, they're more powerful in their company. And this is a very good way to push the company to carry on. And now these companies, they carry on, and they want to support more projects on the field. And they don't know how to do it, so we try to help them. And when you're talking about metrics, there are metrics which are not good at the moment, because when you talk about, you can have organic products, you can have fair trade products, but sometimes they're not mixed. And fair trade product cannot be very good for the environment, and in the opposite, some organic product cannot be very fair trade. But if you take all the criteria of all these labeling system, you can end up to something that can be fair trade and sustainable for conservation at the same time. So there are metrics that can be mixed to fulfill what is required.
True. But we have one of the things, and I take the point that you said, it's the right thing to do, but that's not enough to have it translate. I know if all the products I buy have all the fair trade and organic, it's more likely. And yet, to be very honest, I don't buy all those products. And so more than the right thing to do, how are we getting people to actually do it rather than just being the right thing to do? Because I believe these things are all important, and it's a really long list of things that are important. So the things that might fall to the bottom of that list, I'm actually not going to do something on because they're just so long on the list. So what does it take to take up these choices? How are we going to make different choices? Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to add a product to all the comments that you've made. Roxanne Mankin-Kaysen, founder of the Foundation for Sustainable Waste Resources. So no one's really talking about waste. We're measuring all that you're producing. The street is talking about how well you're doing it. I'd like to just invite you to consider what you're producing maintains a systemic waste everywhere in the world, and that we need to count how well we reintegrate that. So as Heineken's using everything they can as fertilizer, for example, and perhaps the waste you're creating to generate the energy in your plant. Does Barclays look at what is every company doing with waste? It's not just the recycling, but it's the energy that can be created from waste. And I think that can be measured and it can be profitable. Walmart, I think, made $100 million on recycling its cardboard.
Great. Thank you. And again, what's it going to take to make different choices? A comment in the second row here. Different choices. Waste might be 204th on my list. How's it going to move up? How are we going to make some different choices? Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Martin Lin. I'm from Stockholm, Sweden. I'm an environmental consultant.
And I think one thing that could be important here is to create a pull from the market. What if every consumer demanded sustainable services and sustainable practices, sustainable products? I mean, there's a huge need for education, perhaps too huge. And I think I have had the pleasure to work with an organization called Futerra, based in London, Stockholm, and New York, sustainability consultants as well. They have a new book called Branding Biodiversity. They looked at the outcomes from, for example, Nagoya. It talks about loss of species and so on. What if you could convert that, putting the best marketing minds together and create a love for biodiversity, create a brand? I mean, everybody knows Apple, everybody knows Pepsi. It's a brand. You don't have to know the details of Pepsi to love Pepsi. What if we could do the same thing with biodiversity? Branding biodiversity and create a love for that.
Yeah. Comment in the back there. Yeah. We'll come up here next.
My name is Antony Mavropoulos. I come from the waste industry. I think that the major problem will remain, and although there are going to be a lot of improvements, it will never change unless the pricing system reflects the environmental harm of products. As long as this fundamental change does not happen, we can only gradually improve, but never actually change. Thank you.
Comment in front here.
Good. I'm Ted Roosevelt. I also work at a bank, Barclays Bank, and I'm very interested in hearing some of the comments that I've had. So I want to talk about waste. I want to talk about biochemicals as opposed to biofuels, and I want to talk about energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is low-hanging. We should be able to do it pretty easily. But if you look at the average chief financial officer of a company, and the payback period is going to be 5 or 7 years, and he can take a capital expenditure and invest it in increasing his revenues, the markets reward him for doing that or her for doing that. So what we're trying to do as an institution, can we take that investment and take it off the balance sheet? That's very hard to do, but
Yes.
we're working on it, and we've created a joint venture with an accounting firm to help us noodle that one through. We may spend a lot of time trying to achieve that objective, and we may fail. Another area where we're spending a lot of time is, can we take biochemicals, 6 carbon sugars, 5 carbon sugars, and make the equivalent of biodegradable plastics that can be used for water, Coke, or Pepsi. We don't know whether the technology will develop fast enough, but we're spending time and effort doing it. We're working with a wonderful company that gets paid to take waste away from municipal areas. They make energy out of it in 2 forms. They sell it, but the final product is a great soil, which they sell to greenhouses. So it's where we can take technologies like that and try to make money out of it, but we may fail. We're not going to succeed every time. That's what makes it hard.
And each of those examples is probably an example of an old business model, and how do you convert that to working very differently? And the pressures you can imagine in each one of those examples of what would you have to stop doing and change the pressures to be able to achieve that. I don't underestimate what it takes to actually do that work. You want to make a comment in front here, and then, sorry, we'll come there next.
My name is Maria Ramos. I'm from APSA, which is also owned by Barclays, so I apologize for 2 Barclays people in a row. But I wanted to make I come from South Africa, and I run the Barclays operations in Africa. And I think we've been talking about a lot of very, very important things at a company level. But we also need global coordination and global action. And I think that's also very, very important. And we've had a number of attempts at that. I mean, we shouldn't forget the United Nations Climate Fund. That was we've been trying to raise money for that and funding for that for a very important reason. Adaptation is important. And a lot of the changes that need to take place at a technology level, particularly in the part of the world I come from, are very important if we're going to have scale and scalability of the technological change that we need to do if this is going to become, if a lot of the changes around sustainability, to ensure sustainability, are going to really happen. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. Otherwise, we're not going to have sustainability, and the part of the world I come from is not going to be able to implement the kinds of changes on the technological front, on the environmental front, that are going to make a big difference for us in the long run. So that change, we can't lose sight of that. As individual corporates, we can make a big difference. But it's that global action that's going to make the very biggest of differences.
And there's a growing call for increased coordination. But part of that increased coordination will also require giving up potentially some autonomy and power. And so what is the price of coordination? And what fee are we willing to pay for that to happen becomes a very interesting question. You've been waiting to say something.
Yeah, Jochen Seitz, Puma and PPR. I'm interesting to hear that somebody from the banking system wants to take something off the balance sheet. I'd rather actually take something onto the balance sheet, and that's why I came up with the environmental profit and loss account a couple of years ago, which actually monetizes the environmental footprints in dollars and cents or euros and cents. So basically, you know, some talk about waste, some talk about carbon, land use, pollution, or any other impact, but how do we put them into relationship and how do we actually measure them? So by monetizing each of the impacts and doing that throughout the supply chain, you can actually visualize your impacts onto the balance sheet, what it really is. And only when you do that, we can actually, you know, go away from talking and walking the talk, because that is the biggest problem that we have. We do not measure our impact. And if we want to design for impact, we first have to know where the impact really is. And it cannot just be for one or the other, for water or carbon. It has to be everything together. EP&L does exactly that. So I encourage every company to actually do an EP&L. I'm looking for 5 more to build a consortium of companies that actually scale the EP&L to the next level.
And then we'll come to the back there in a second, but still we're in this tension, right, of we can measure more than we're measuring now, and things that we need to do can't all be measured. And so how do we live in that tension and make choices? Yes.
Hi, Oliver Libby from Hudson Amos Partners. We're a private equity firm focused on renewable energy. And one of the things that, as an investor, I know anyone else who looks at balance sheets and quarterly reports knows, is that it's not just what's being measured, it's also the fact that it's a uniform measurement for financial returns. So we can all look at a balance sheet for any kind of corporation and make certain judgments very quickly on how well they're doing on unified metrics. Doesn't matter what they do. I know we've also all looked at sustainability reports that come out of companies, and they all measure different things based on what they decided was important. So I think a crucial element of metrics is not just measuring more things, but unifying and codifying something, may not be perfect right away, but something that allows for a snap judgment on how well a company is doing in sustainability versus the entire rest of the market. Then you build in incentives on that and make people actually change.
Now what should we do in the meantime? You're making the choices in the meantime, right? Right, because we don't have that yet. Right? Well, some metrics we have, but we don't have an agreed upon set of metrics. So we are getting closer, right? So
yeah, much closer than people think on this standardization. We're not at the restaurants A, B, C, and D, but between what Ceres is doing, what Disclosure is doing, I mean, we're a lot closer. I mean, I think it's important at this stage in the conversation to recognize that we are much closer to many of these things than people recognize. And one thing that maybe we should do at the end of this session is summarize, because he's absolutely right. You can't design for impact without knowing where you really stand today. And, you know, Ted's point about taking it off the balance sheet, that's transformational. Sure. You know, so we are much further along.
Okay, so then why don't we recognize, right, if that's true? And given that this is a group of people in this space, why don't we?
You hit it, like the Maastricht Treaty. Everybody has to give up a little sovereignty. Everyone has a pet project, right? We should summarize. We come to 5 priorities, 6 priorities, and people have to kind of collaborate on bigger things. That was Bill Clinton's challenge. And the lady who mentioned the media, and, you know, it's true. The media don't understand this. We should be doing media education, investor education. Educate the people who communicate on the fact that we're further along. This is not hard as we make it sound. And if it becomes the lifestyle police, nobody's going to do it. So we're much further along. It's much more mainstream than people are ready to recognize. And I think if we got organized around a couple of key things, we would be designing for impact.
Great. And then the same question, what's keeping us from getting organized, right? And this is a forum, right, and a format to do that. So I'm going to ask our speakers in a moment to share some of their thoughts and reactions to this. And remember that this organization is built on commitments of the ability to get platform for some of those issues. And the invitation here is to collaborate and partner in ways to achieve all of those things. Before we come back to our speakers, I think we want to also recognize one of the commitments. So if you wouldn't mind. Joel Jackson from Mobius Motors, to share your commitment. Then we'll come back to each of you for some closing remarks.
It's on? Okay. Hi, everyone. So I run Mobius Motors. We design, manufacture, and sell cars for the African mass market. Our vehicles are explicitly designed for local market demand, so they're rugged enough to traverse the highly degraded terrain that plagues the continent. They can carry heavy loads, they can travel long distances, but crucially, they're sold at a price that most people can afford. Beyond just building more appropriate vehicles, though, we are really aiming to empower entrepreneurial buyers to use our vehicles to run transport businesses. So it could be public transport, goods delivery, school buses, medical care. There's a huge range of different applications of our vehicles. And in turn, that will create social change in the communities to which those services are offered, connecting people to education and to healthcare and to markets, all the fundamental development catalysts that drive prosperity. So our 2012 CGI commitment is to manufacture 1,000 of our vehicles across East Africa over the next 2 years, and in turn aim to mobilize 50,000 end users within those communities. So if anyone is interested in learning more, let me know over the next few days. I'll be here.
Great. Thank you for sharing your commitment. Eugene, you want to share some closing thoughts?
Yeah, I guess as far as I'm concerned, I think it's really important that we find this model to create shared value and establish a basis for partnership for growth, especially in Africa. I mean, as an African, I'm still really concerned about making sure that we deliver the basic priorities, like access to clean water, access to health. You know, we haven't talked about that. You know, we still have a lot of people in Africa who are heavily impacted by malaria. If you have malaria, you can't go to work, you can't go to school. We need to have people have more access to education, because at the end of the day, education is basically the bridge to solving and addressing all these problems that we discussed. So all these issues that are discussed here in the Western world, in the US, in Europe, I think it's great. Let's not forget about, you know, the basic priorities that are still extremely important in emerging markets. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I think at the end of the day, what this comes down to is leadership. I think the notion that the corporate world is very short-term is somewhat overblown, because I think, as I said before, there's lots of areas of the world that are very short-term in focus. So this is about organizations, whether in business or other areas of the world, deciding that they're going to make a difference on this stuff, setting a clear agenda. I think it's absolutely right to pick a few things and focus on those, and then just relentlessly pursue them. There's a lot of hope, I think, around the types of organizations that are becoming more committed. There's a difference between being interested, complying, and actually being committed. I think the more commitment that we see around the world, we see those organizations that are committed become successful. This movement will gather its momentum, and I think we can make a real difference. But at the end of the day, it comes down to leadership.
So context is important. I do want to say we have made enormous progress, and we ought to feel good about it. We're not where we were 10 years ago. We're not arguing that sustainability issues are core, fundamental business issues, and that's great. We're seeing progress in pockets. We're seeing leadership at one company in one industry. But we've got to think about systems change if we're going to get to the big issues, whether it's the social issues, the magnitude of poverty, the magnitude of depletion of our natural resources, of climate change, of oil sands. We're about to invest $80 billion, not me, but many fossil fuel companies, in oil sands in Alberta. That may very well be, according to scientists, the game over proposition in terms of managing carbon emissions while we're bringing them down in little ways. So we've got to design the systems and integrate into our systems how to deal with those things. And let me mention 3 or 4, and those are the kind of things I think we could do. One is reporting and metrics. When Ceres, the nonprofit group that I run, launched the Global Reporting Initiative in the mid-90s, saying corporations should report on their sustainability footprint, We thought not only what gets measured gets managed, but that it would be a game changer. I would argue it has made a very real difference. People are managing their footprint better, but financial analysts aren't using it. Let's integrate sustainability reports, which 3,500 multinational companies are doing, with financial reports. If we believe these are financial issues, like the gentleman from Puma talked about with a profit and loss statement, we need to integrate these things, not just paste them together, but show that they are core fundamental issues. And we need to make other systems changes. How do we put the honest market signals in place? If carbon has a price, let's put a price on carbon. And that takes a collective of leaders like those in this room. We can't think that we're going to get it done on a one-off basis. It has to be some systemic change. So pricing things honestly is crucial. So rather than every one of us, every one of you who are members of a Chamber of Commerce who is fighting caps on carbon or prices on carbon, we need to change that debate. Those are some of the big issues. And we need to change the other rules of the game. So rather than quarterly earnings, move to annual earnings and tie in compensation of financial players as well as corporations to a longer-term time frame. I think if we take on some of the systemic issues, so it is not only the leaders, and we have leaders, and they're moving us, but we've got to make sure that there's a level playing field and we're all playing by it. It could be done. We've done it in many places in other parts of the world, but we're not going to get the kind of bang for our buck or the progress until the leaders in this room step up and bring their trade associations, the other people in their sectors into the mix, and saying we can't make small steps, we can't do it alone, we've got to take the big steps, and then we'll get there because we have to. So thank you for all that you're each doing.
So please join me in thanking our speakers once again. Thank you. And thank you for everybody for participating in our dialogue and pushing the frontier forward. Thank you.